All right. Well, welcome everyone to another episode of the Mindgasms podcast. Going to talk to my friends, the Pragmatic Christian, also known as Hayden Bruce, and Sam's Bulldog, also known as Ed Kennedy. And we're going to talk about our favorite topics that for all of us to discuss from different perspectives. Hayden considering himself a Christian, Ed considering himself an atheist. I consider myself an atheist as well, but I don't think, as Ed was just talking about before we started, that there's as much of a bright red line between what we know and what we don't know as Ed does. So we always get into interesting discussions, and I thought we could talk about, in general, topics like truth, pragmatism, labels, what I just mentioned, what we know and what we don't know, and Christianity and atheism, and use those as jumping off points. So why don't whichever one of you guys want to go first, doesn't matter. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves and then say a little bit about yourselves there.
Go ahead, Hayden.
Well, I am Hayden Bruce. I am the host of a podcast called The Pragmatic Christian. I also have a website called pragmaticchristian.com, and I mostly do that. I'm very interested in questions of religion, truth, epistemology, as well as morality and a whole host of different things, and how all those topics kind of intermingle when it comes to studying religion. A lot of different fields seem to come together in interesting ways that they don't in other areas, such as science. They are very different fields when it comes to studying them. And I'm very interested in those questions, especially because I grew up as a Christian in a Christian household. As I've told my story before on this podcast, even that I went to school, started deconstructing, and had a sort of crisis of faith that hasn't really ended, but it has started a much more philosophical journey for me. I'm a lot more interested in questions, how we ask those questions, how those questions play out in our actual lives than having certainties or answers. So a lot of my work and the podcast that I do surround those kind of themes. So that's kind of what I'm about and what I do. So, Ed.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sam's Bulldog. My real name is Edward Kennedy. I'm on Twitter at Edward M. Kennedy 2, Sam's Bulldog. I'm also on YouTube as Sam's Bulldog. I am a lifelong skeptic, science and philosophy lover. I like to expose silly ideas.
From the crib, you were a skeptic?
From the crib. Since March of 1966, I have been a skeptic. No, but as long as I can remember, I've been a skeptic, what you would call a skeptic. And
I'm just fucking with you.
I know, of course. It's just my natural disposition to be suspicious isn't the right word, but questioning of all data seemed sensible to me.
I think we all share that in common.
I hope so. Critical thinking. I enjoy listening to public intellectuals. I'm fascinated by the subject of religion. Obviously a lifelong non-believer, but as a historical human interest story, it doesn't get much more interesting. Science probably is, but I could argue that religion was our first attempt at science, and that's why it's so bad at it. I think a lot of people have made that point. But let's get into it. Everybody knows who I am.
Sure. So what do you guys want to get into first of those topics that I mentioned? It doesn't really matter what order we talk about them in. You could talk about truth, morality, labels, pragmatism, atheism, what we know and what we don't know.
I was thinking about Hayden, because I look at Hayden, I look at your tweets, And I'm not armchair analyzing you, my brother. I'm trying to understand you. But it seems like you've got a foot on both sides of that bright red line. Mm-hmm. And you have like this internal battle. And you've talked about it a lot. I know I'm not speaking out of school here. This is what you enjoy talking about. And this is kind of fascinating to me because if anything, I'm too sure of my ideas and I have to check myself. In other words, I'm in the camp where, I immediately discard and call it absurd and wonder how anybody could waste any fuel on any number of topics. So what I see like in your tweets that you poke fun at people who are at a fundamentalist psychology, but I also see you dancing with the devil, so to speak. And it just seems like I think I've given you enough.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what you just said is very true. I definitely do dance with the devil, and I'm trying to figure out where exactly to start with it. I mean, I remember being so certain about things back, when I was growing up, being, a very fundamentalist myself and very certain about Christianity, about religion, about God, about Jesus. And I remember the feelings that sort of psychological state allowed me. And after you kind of, take the other pill and see things are a lot more different.
Is it the red pill?
Yeah, I couldn't remember what the colors were, which one represented what. But after you kind of start deconstructing things and seeing two sides to things and realizing that they're, whoa, we really don't know what we don't know and don't know if we even really know what we do know. And it kind of messes with your head a little bit. And so I remember being that certain about things back then. And I kind of have taken a stance of not being too certain about things. I think that we can be approximately certain about some things more so than other things. I very much appreciate science. I very much appreciate common sense even, and, our experiences, but those things are always biased. So I understand that. So I say all that because as I have not moved into one other kind of thinking or ideology or worldview. Like for me, like I wanted to, or at least I was very much tempted to, become an atheist. And I had to kind of work out like, how would I, do that, because I've never been an atheist before. So I had to kind of like figure out what would that look like? How would I talk about that? How would I describe myself, or how would I identify myself? And as I was, going through that, I say the presence of God, and I know that's a fuzzy term, but this weird feeling, back in those days where I was super certain, like it wasn't the certainty gone, but the feelings were still there. And so I still felt personally connected in relationship with some kind of, I don't want to say force, but the force is reality. Like I felt a personal connection, and a lot of work has been done by really good or very interesting neuroscientists like Andrew Newberg, who researches the effects of like religion on the brain and faith on the brain. And he shows how like the parts of our brain that that function when we are like talking to each other and talk face to face to human beings, all those things get stronger and stronger when a religious person relates to like a person of God, not just like the world, but like an actual person. And so perhaps the reason why I feel those things is because I've strengthened those parts of my brain and functions and circuitry in my brain so much that it's, residue from back then. But for some reason, I don't want to get rid of it, you know, like it's very, very emotional. It's very personal and an emotional, you know, thing of how I identify, how I think about myself, not just how I talk about myself with other people, but how, you know, my self-image to myself. And I think that that's a difficult thing to just kind of throw away. And as I've read more, as I've researched more, as I've, you know, gone down these different rabbit holes, I've kind of decided for myself that it's not something that I want to get rid of. So however I deal with the questions and, you know, questions, criticisms against religion and Christianity, I personally feel, and I've chosen, you know, it's a decision at this point. You know, even if we have free will or not, you know, it feels like a decision that I want to keep that going. I at least, maybe it's just a social experiment with a person of one, or a study, you know, person of one, where I want to see what life looks like being really extremely intellectually honest about these things, but also having those feelings, having that circuitry, having that kind of relationship. And I'm kind of just seeing where that goes and where that leads me. And, you know, because I believe that it's lights out after we die, and I only have this one life. So why not live with the weirdness, you know, as long as possible, but also with the caveat that I'm going to be as intellectually honest as I possibly can and continue to do so. So I guess that's kind of an answer to your question.
This is interesting that both of you made me think about a few things there. One was when I did my podcast the other day with my friend James Sullivan, who's the guy who basically introduced me to postmodernism. I didn't know this before we talked, but I thought it was interesting that he was religious, and then he became an atheist, and now he's Christian again, because his wife wanted or I guess technically his fiance, very soon to be wife, wanted him to be Christian. And I thought that was interesting because he approaches it from a postmodernist perspective, which I appreciate, which to me makes it more difficult for him to become a fundamentalist or believe in supernatural things. And it's interesting too that you don't really seem to believe in anything supernatural. Like, you kind of have the same perspective of life after death as probably both and I, Hayden. And it's also interesting, like, I just think it's interesting that I would say people who have very similar perspectives on life as me are Christian, while I am not Christian. And I also was reminded when Ed and I were talking about about your beliefs about Christianity the other day, and how you just said there that you basically, it's an aspect of your worldview that you don't want to get rid of. And I'm not trying to pressure you to get rid of it, of course, because I don't really care anywhere near as much as I used to. But I'm curious about why that is too, because I mean, it seems like if you wanted to, since you're a really smart and intellectual guy, you could get rid of that perspective if you wanted to, and approach the worldview through any lens that you wanted to. And that being said, I'm not saying that you necessarily should, or that it's better to view it through that way.
Mm-hmm. I guess one of the main reasons why I don't want to just, you know, throw it away and try to construct, you know, similar things through a more materialist mindset is just because I don't have as much faith in humans being able to construct those kind of complex things, you know, especially when it comes to, I mean, we can come up with beliefs and stuff and say that we believe in things, but I think it's a lot harder for the body to follow along with our beliefs. You know, I definitely believe that our biology, our psychology, and I believe that we are an organism, and I believe that our organismness affects, and I don't want to say determines, but it gives us the material to work with, and we can only go so far with certain things. That being said, I also am very aware of the process of evolution. I just got finished reading Joe Henrich's book, The Secret of Our Success. And he mentions a couple times, throughout the book that human beings are really bad at creating institutions from scratch. We are much better at copying what works for other people and working from there. And so, the idea of being an atheist, in the way that we would discuss that or conceptualize that, is very recent, is very new. I am not one of the people that think that it can't be done. Obviously, it can be. You guys are both, can attest to that. And I think that there's tons of, self-describing atheists that have very meaningful lives, but they're working from a history different than mine. They're working with foundations and starting places that are different from mine. I can't go back in time and change what I started with. Yeah. And so, I don't think, like, Tim Ferriss is a good example, where I would say he's an example of someone who's extremely healthy and lives a meaningful life and has good relationships and is really smart and clear. And I would call him a moral person. Of course, I don't know him personally, but he would describe himself as at least agnostic, if not atheist. And, I think he's a good example, but I also didn't live the way he lived. I don't have the upbringing that he has. And so I'm kind of working with the materials that I'm given and trying to put as much pressure on those things as possible. So I can't remember who said it. It was a theologian at some point. I think it was a theologian, but some guy at some point said that the only kind of faith worth following is one is still standing at the end of the battle of questions that you throw at it and evidence that you throw at it. So I'm living my life with eyes wide open, taking in evolution science and neurology and philosophy and all. I'm trying to live my life with my eyes as wide open as possible. And whatever kind of faith doesn't keep standing at the end of that barrage, how did I start that sentence?
Isn't the answer none? If we define faith as belief without evidence, which is what I think we're talking about, I mean, there's a lot of ways to use that word. But when we say the Christian faith, you take it on faith. You are believing something that is not in a science type. Not that everything has to be in a science textbook, but you understand what I'm saying. So, yeah. So, and again, we all believe. I'm not suggesting that every non-believer has a perfectly ordered philosophy, mind you. Mm-hmm. But what I'm saying is, if one performs that exercise on one's beliefs actively, faith is going to lose. And this is why I'm talking. This is the bright red line I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Faith is going to lose every single time.
Well, this reminds me of what you and I were.
It would be the science of Mormonism, right? I mean, if there's endless evidence that Jesus was hanging out in Missouri, right? It wouldn't be the Mormon faith. It would be the scientific science of Mormonism.
Well, this reminds me of what you and I were getting into a little bit before we started this, Ed. I think that other than just being belief without evidence, I think that faith is an emotion. So like I was saying, I think it's really difficult to talk people out of their emotions, because like in the same how I differ from you in my perspective on atheism is that I now, since I used to be a militant atheist and now I no longer am, I still am an atheist because I don't believe that any gods exist, because I don't have this feeling of faith. I don't feel like there are any gods. I don't see any evidence at all either, but I don't feel like there are. I don't have this feeling of faith.
That doesn't compute with me, because a feeling is not a validation of facts in the universe.
But that's how we get all of our. That's the lens through which we get our facts. Like when scientists, we've talked about this at length before. But when scientists observe facts and these become like collectively acknowledged facts within our culture, they're always viewed through the lens of those scientists who are interpreting them, and our intuitions always influence our rational thinking.
Well, yeah, but
can I interject?
Yes.
Yeah, lots of science that is not that is anti intuition, and that's why you have falsifiable experiments, repeatable falsifiable experiments. But go ahead, Hayden.
I'll try to pave a middle path between those two positions. I think that feelings are not the only way. Now, of course, how we describe feeling can play into this, but if we're just talking about like emotions, feelings, like in that nature, I think that to Andrew's point, it is useful for some facts, but at the same time, it's not necessarily required for other facts. And I know what you mean by that. You're coming from like the postmodernist lens, Andrew, and you're talking about like our biases influencing our interpretation of like data.
And I'm talking about like the work of people like Jonathan Haidt and Antonio Damasio and people like that who challenge this distinction, like Antonio Damasio's book Descartes' Error of Dualism, how there's this division between the body and the mind, and how there's how what rationalism is founded on, that there are rational thoughts and there are emotions, and we should overpower our emotions with our rational thought, but they're always like interconnected, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. So emotions are 100% needed or required for action. Like we need emotions, we need feeling of some sort of, to some degree, in order to act on things, in order to be motivated by certain things. And so when we get data, we can be motivated to interpret it in certain ways, or to leave some out, or to take it all in, or to conclude with one thing over another. I understand that. At the same time, I think it's a little different where like you don't need to have like a feeling about a certain piece of data in order for that to be validated. But our feelings, like emotional feelings, are definitely needed for certain kind of facts. And, and at this point, our facts are getting mixed up with our experiences. I think that all data, all perception is experience, and that we only know things through experience. If we don't have an experience, or if somebody didn't have an experience of something, we wouldn't know that it's there or exists. And in our experiences, certain facts require that kind of feeling. Like if I am in pain, that's a feeling, then I know something's wrong. If I don't feel that pain, I don't know that there's a fact there to be worried about. So facts are necessary, or feelings are necessary for some kind of experiences that lead to information, knowledge, conclusions, inquiry, like, oh, there's pain, maybe I need to look into that. And then, more things become intermingled. I think we can separate that kind of feeling and the experiences which lead to facts, to certain kind of facts, and separate that from like math. Like I think there are certain kinds of knowledge that are very rational, but of course our conclusions are always biased in some way. But at the same time, there are certain things, like I would say math, that are pretty non-feeling. How we discuss or debate certain mathematical things over others, those definitely feelings definitely get lumped into that whole discussion, and whether to go down one rabbit hole in math or physics rather than another, like that's definitely an emotional kind of event or thing that happens, or relation or dynamic that happens. But I think that there's truth in what Ed's saying, and that, like you said with like Jonathan Haidt and stuff, I think there's some truth with what you were saying. I can't remember what the original topic was. I had something to say, but I guess.
I think I see what you're saying there too. You also, like, I'm not saying that if I feel like 2 + 2 = 5, that means that 2 + 2 = 5. And you also reminded me of another thing that Ed and I were talking about last week. Like, for example, if a man decides that he's a woman all of a sudden, or a woman decides that she is a man all of a sudden, I have no problem with that. But it doesn't suddenly mean that if I decide that I'm a woman, if I decide that I'm a woman, rather, then all of a sudden my penis magically disappears and I magically sprout a vagina.
Right. You don't just become whatever you feel. I think the original topic was, sorry.
I mean, the facts float free of our feelings. I mean, putting aside love.
They don't, though.
Well, there is, I would, to agree with Ed, there is some kind of world. There is some kind of reality that is separate from us. Like otherwise, our experiences and our feelings, you know, they wouldn't be of anything. So there is something beyond us.
You
know,
guys
something
agree
like a
about
world.
this more than I do, which I want to point out.
But I mean,
An
look,
atheist and a Christian agree more than I do. I'm also an atheist, but you guys agree about this more than I do, which I think is great and interesting.
We're one of those radical relativists.
Yeah,
just wants to go along with
I'm an evil postmodern neo-Marxist.
Yes.
I think Andrew should run for mayor because he just wants to. He's happy to take everybody's point of view.
Yeah. My perspective on Islam is wishy-washy, as you said, right?
Yeah. And uninformed. But look, I mean, the reality is the world's religions. If we put all the world's religions in human history together, the evidence for them is zero, or so terrible, not worthy of discussion.
Is it about evidence for most believers, though?
Well, again, what most people do isn't my purview. I'm talking about the way my brain works.
Okay.
I'd like to be confident that what I believe is backed up by evidence.
Mm-hmm. And
if there is no evidence, I mean, I said this so many times. If there's no evidence, you know, atheism is just the non-belief of an assertion with no evidence, right?
Yeah.
So you can make a million different assertions. Batman is real. Okay, well, where's the evidence? We don't have any. Well, then I don't believe that assertion.
Well, you could even say that there's a similar amount of evidence for Batman as there is for some religions or religious figures because there are comic books, right?
Right, but you're playing.
I'm not using that to say that Batman is real. I'm just trying to support your argument in that way.
I just love that he had to clarify. I'm not trying to say that I think that Batman is real.
Because I think Ed might interpret it that way.
No. What I'm saying is the reason religion does not interest me, the belief of religion is such a non-starter for me because the evidence room is empty.
That's it, Ed, for me, like, even though I'm really interested in learning about religions and mythologies, that's why I personally do not believe in any religions either, because I don't see any evidence for them either.
Right. So I use that same type of calculus for every other assertion I hear out in the world. Is there a good reason? What are my reasons for believing X? Okay. And if the response is I don't know, or I don't have anything worthy to back it up, I should abandon that belief. There's no reason to believe something that is simply asserted. Again, this is me, right? I mean, so that means I have zero, as far as I'm concerned, I have zero faith. That doesn't mean there's zero probability that Mormonism is true. It's greater than zero. It's somewhat greater than zero that Mormonism is true. It's possible that Mormonism is true. It's just really, 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 really unlikely. So why waste time with it? I don't understand why people, otherwise smart people, abandon their critical thinking faculties and try to smuggle in what makes them feel better. And again, I'm not saying I don't do this in other spheres of my life, mind you. Okay.
I think we both know that you're not being judgmental about it.
Well, no, I can be judgmental about it.
I mean, right now and in this instant.
No. I'm not. I mean, it's just fascinating to me that people could expend so much energy and time on something that you know. The fact that there is no evidence, the fact that the claims are miraculous, it's so foreign to me. I can't understand why anybody would do it. Now, I understand.
That's very intellectually honest of you, too, and I share that feeling sometimes as well.
That's not to say that there isn't a positive utility to lots of aspects of worship and the sacred and the shared experience and rituals and all the rest of it. But again, that goes nowhere in explaining the veracity of the claims.
Well, you mentioned utility, and I think Hayden, that's a good segue into talking about the utility argument in terms of pragmatism.
Before you go to utility,
we could also talk about our different definitions of truth.
Before we go there, I want to ask.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
You didn't. I interrupted you. Hayden, I want to ask you a question. I wrote it down. I'm curious, when you were going through all this Christian education and hanging out with everybody who shared your faith, quote unquote, what did you guys think of Hindus? Like, there's 1 billion Hindus in India, just to use them as an example.
Yeah.
I'm sure a room full of people you went to college with would agree that they're there and they worship other gods and they're just as sincere as the people in the room at your college. In other words, similarities across the board. But like, God would have set up the situation that they'd be ignorant of his word and therefore have to spend eternity in hell. Did they expend any energy worrying about, like, or were Hindus just like, when Sam Harrison, and we don't have to talk about him, but when you know, Christopher Hitchens brings up the Hindus when he's talking to a defender, a Christian apologist, they never respond. They never really, they just act like they don't exist. Like, did you?
Yeah. That's a great point.
There's some absolutely terrible answers to. Does something change? I'm echoing.
I don't have an echo.
Yeah, I had an echo for a second. I'm not getting it again now.
Maybe okay. I don't have it either. Yeah, there are. I would say the majority of Christians, and I'll just speak for Christians, I would say that the majority of Christians have a really, really bad answer to that question.
What is it?
Well, for me, growing up, you know, if you were to ask me about like the Hindus and what I feel about that, I would say it's really unfortunate and all the more reason why we have to go to them and evangelize to them, to tell them about Jesus. So, I don't know.
Let me stop you right. I'm curious about this. So would you, and again, would you characterize it as genuine compassion or just not really give a shit?
Seems more like compassion to me, but I'm not sure.
I know. I mean, I guess the only way I would have to, the only way I'd be able to answer that in the affirmative, as far as the not giving a shit thing, you would have to like look at their like actual action. So like, there's a lot of Christians who believe the way that I'm describing, who, you know, are, you know, always telling their churches or people, maybe they like travel in America a lot, and their like whole like thing is telling people like, hey, like, you guys aren't giving enough money to missionaries. You guys aren't sending enough missionaries. Do you actually give a shit? And, you know, making people feel bad. As far as the people that do give a shit, I would say that there are, you know, I was one of them. I went to school to become a missionary. So I, you know, and I've met a lot of people since then who have gone into missionary work and stuff. And I know that they do give a shit. I would say that, I don't know about numbers as far as saying like majority, but many Christians are very like, you know, we would say missions minded, missions oriented, where, you know, they're over here in America thinking about the Hindus, and, you know, a lot of people like spend hours, hundreds and thousands of hours praying for the Hindus, you know, for this example, and crying and being upset and distraught and just weeping on the ground, you know, for God to, you know, save them. Like, it really does take an emotional toll, a very deep, authentic emotional toll on people, which is really sad because, I mean, you know, like many atheists, you know, I can appreciate that kind of devotion to something and that kind of care for others, but they've, you know, unfortunately are stuck in this moral dilemma where they have to think about things like that. And I'm very much against thinking about things like that, you know, even in my most like religious moments. Like, I'm much more of a pluralist. I'm much more, if there is a God, he's, you know, working and influencing or trying to reach out to those people in a way that cultural evolution just, you know, maybe it has cut it off. Maybe they are right. I'm not someone that thinks that all roads lead to heaven, but I do think that a lot of roads lead to heaven. Just as a figure, I don't believe in heaven. But I think that there are different ways of reaching, healthy lifestyle, good morals, a healthy view of the world, and how to relate with each other, which can be classed as, religious themes or things. But yeah, a lot of Christians, a lot of religious people, a lot of fundamentalists have a really terrible, I would judge it as terrible answer to that question. And unfortunately, they're stuck in a system where they have to think that way. And for the ones that are super authentic and genuine, they're stuck being depressed about that fact. Depressed about babies going to hell.
There's a worse answer than that, though. I mean, the worse answer than that is fuck them, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And some people live like that. Some people live their lives as if that.
This is interesting too, because you mentioned pluralism, and you reminded me of that book that you sent me that I mentioned that I started reading, Hayden, about I think it's called Truth Engagements Across Philosophical Traditions. And I thought it was really interesting, the comparison between William James, I guess you would call him the seminal philosophical pragmatist, and the distinction between him and Nietzsche on truth. And Nietzsche has kind of more of a what I would, in modern terms, of a postmodernist perspective on truth. He's like, William James is a pluralist, as you said, seemingly. You know more about pragmatism than me. But Nietzsche and postmodernists in general are relativists, I would say. And I would say it seems to me actually like you and Ed actually have more in common in terms of your perspective on truth in that sense than me, I would say. Like I would say that I'm probably the only relativist out of the three of us.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to label yourself that way, definitely, I would never label myself as a relativist, but that's because I have the tools of like pragmatism. And I personally think that pragmatism handles, those issues and questions better.
Pragmatism, sorry to interrupt, brother.
Yep.
Pragmatism, by definition, leads to objective answers, yes or no type answers.
Does that seem accurate to you in terms of pragmatism, Hayden?
It can. So pragmatism is a lot more, it's kind of dialectical in the sense that it takes the option. So let's say it takes two options and then it tries to find a middle path, which is kind of, Taoist. Maybe, I don't know. I guess I don't know enough about Taoism. But it tries to take middle paths, but it is also very receptive to, they would say experience. Ed would say facts. It's very receptive to science, to facts, to what is actually, experienceable. And it doesn't, it tries to gain clarity on things. And, professional philosophers can always become unclear, how they talk about things. But, the ideal of pragmatism is to become clear on what you mean when you use a word, what you are thinking about when you think about an object. And so, pragmatists do that by, when they think of an object, they think of all the things that the object does, that you don't really know what an object does unless you can act on it or act with it, or it acts in front of you and you can observe how it acts. But the actions, the uses, the, utility of a thing, but it's not just utility, it's actions in general. Like, you don't know what a clock does unless you know how you can use a clock. And that seems right from a psychological perspective. Human beings have evolved to look at objects as tools. It's what we do. So it seems to go hand in hand with just how we think in general. But some of the early
makes a lot of sense to me. That's
why
I really appreciate your perspective, even though I don't entirely agree with it. I agree with many aspects of it, and I really appreciate all the books that you send me to learn more about it and whatnot. Sorry, I interrupted you there, though.
No, I was just gonna say that the first pragmatists, except for the father, Charles Peirce, were all psychologists. While that field was kind of growing and becoming what it is today, they were all psychologists. So I think that kind of helped when it came to their formulating their philosophy. But that's actually how I got into pragmatism, was learning about psychology and neurology. And that's what led me to pragmatism actually in general. I told you about a book that I am really into by Michael Graziano called Consciousness and the Social Brain. And it was reading that book specifically that led me to pragmatism. Because I had heard about pragmatism before I read that, but I didn't know what it really was. I just had the general idea. And so after reading that book, I was like, oh, this is how the brain works and how we perceive reality. And it made me think of pragmatism. And then, you know, I didn't research it right away, but then it came up again. And I was like, oh, I really need to dig into this. And then it just so happened to dig its heels, you know, or its claws into, you know, my brain, my interest. And now, you know, it's led me to where I am like now, but it was learning like science and like psychology and neuroscience that, you know, led me to that philosophy.
Can I put you on the spot and ask you some like direct questions about your belief, like scale of 1 to 10?
Sure.
10 being you're personally certain or effectively certain, and 0 being you're 99.99999% sure the answer is no. Do you believe in a personal God?
So I'm gonna clarify the scale. So 10 is, I'm never gonna have a 10 because I'm never gonna be 100% certain about anything. So here's how I'll augment it.
Acknowledging that 10 is impossible and 0 is impossible, right?
Yeah. So 0 and 10 are impossible.
How about a scale of 1 to 9?
Okay, 1 to 9. 8 being I'm willing to act on it. 9 being I'm willing to act on it, and I'm sure it's that way, at least, you know,
9
approximately.
Or
what's that?
9 is you'd bet your life on it, or who you love.
Okay, yeah, I like that.
Life on it.
I like that a lot better.
So, do you believe in a personal God, a God that hears prayers and occasionally answers them? You know what I mean by that. I don't need to explain.
Yeah, but so you just added a lot of things in such a short sentence to personal God. I'll split the question into 2. I believe in a personal God.
Go ahead.
Well, I'll clarify what that God is, but I believe in a personal God. I'll put that at 8. I'm willing to live by that. A God that hears prayers, acts in the world, is like a subject out in reality. I'll put it like I'll put it at like a 2 or a 3.
Oh wait, I'm not sure then.
Oh, so you're not very sure at all then.
But you said 8.
No. Those are very different gods.
All right. Let's start over.
How about that? It sounds like you were just basically explaining your definition of God, right?
No, let me. When I say a personal God, you know what I mean. I mean a God that would be here whether you're here or not, right? Mm-hmm. Whether humans ever arose, and whatever. A personal God that I don't want to complicate. I want to make it simple.
Yeah. So I know what you mean by that term.
Exactly. So what's the number?
Probably a 2 or a 3.
Okay. So the resurrection as told in Christian dogma of Jesus.
So for philosophy people that are listening, we are speaking in metaphysically realist terms where there are real objects and not real objects, and that is it. It's a very
I'm talking about if the world was a movie and we could rewind the tape, did that event occur at some particular point in time in some particular place?
2 or 3.
2 or 3.
And I mean, and that's probably still generous.
Okay, interesting. Do
I believe that an actual body, after being actually dead, rose up, 3 days later? Like,
right.
No.
Right. Yeah, that's
probably
right.
not.
And now
that you tend to not have supernatural beliefs, broadly speaking, right?
Right. So wait,
no, I don't.
Next question. So next question is, other than its self-soothing psychological value, does putting that aside, does prayer work?
Yes.
On a scale of 1 to 10.
Oh, well, okay. Going back to, I had to remember the game. No, if prayer means speaking out to an invisible deity who will then act on those things on your behalf, then no, I do not.
So it's a 1 or whatever.
Right. So it's probably like a 1.
Okay. Interesting. And the existence of other gods, right? There's been obviously a million other religions and so on. Would you say that the personal God that the Hindu God or gods that Hindus and Muslims, I know it's the same God for Muslims, Jews, and Christians, Thor and Zeus, are you equally of equal? Can you intellectually say that your disbelief level is the same for Vishnu as it is for the Christian God?
Good question.
Yeah, where I'm at right now, I think that's different. I mean, obviously, if I wouldn't believe in my own version of God, obviously I wouldn't believe in others either.
It's kind of a question when I think about it.
No, but then the next kind of like branch off of that question is, if I do believe in my God, how would I compare that belief to the belief in all those other things? Yeah, I guess it would depend on what you mean by evidence. Because, earlier I was saying that I'm a pluralist. I think, where I'm at right now and how I kind of think about reality in the world, I think that it is as likely that there is like the Christian God as others, or at least something like it.
Right.
Like, the world is full of like chaos and all these forces that we are contingent on that we don't have direct access to. So to think that those things wouldn't be possibly gods, it's kind of weird. So I think that if, the Christian God is, real, I think it's almost as likely that, all those other guys probably exist. What's interesting is that up into the New Testament, so for thousands of years of like the Jewish tradition, Hebrews believed in other gods. They didn't just believe in their, monotheism didn't become a thing until, around like the Roman times, among the Jewish people.
Right.
But they kind of introduced that, like with their individual monotheistic God. That was what like Romans and other people would look at them and call them atheist, because they didn't have like all these other gods. They called them atheist because they had one. It's really interesting.
So Christopher Hitchens at this point would say mankind is getting closer and closer to the truth,
So given what you said there, Hayden, about how the existence of other gods is equally as likely, and also given what you said earlier about how you think that one of the main reasons that you're still Christian is your upbringing, I'm curious about why that's different for you than it is for me, because and why you're Christian if you think that it's equally likely that other gods exist. Because like I've explained my story before too, but I mean I wasn't training to be a missionary, and I was never really a fundamentalist or anything like that, but I was raised by Christian ministers and had an entirely Christian childhood, and I don't have any attachment to that faith now. So yeah. I wonder why that's different for you.
I think I lost this specific question.
Why do you believe in specifically the Christian God when you think that other gods are equally likely to exist, and why do you think that your history contributes to you being attached to your Christian identity, even though I have also had a Christian upbringing and I am not attached to that identity?
Yeah. I would say probably because if there is a God the way that, Christians have described him, if you go to the text from where I'm standing, I think that God would be understanding. Like I'm not a universalist, but that's also because I think that some truths are better than other truths. Like Ed, I think some things are like more real or more factual or more true than other things. So I think there is competition for, maybe competition is the wrong word. I just think that some things are truer or better or more whatever than other things. And I would also say that, when it comes to in this sort of hypothetical situation, because all these things have caveats for me now, or not even caveats, I just am thinking about things through a different paradigm now. I'm not a metaphysical realist. like at all, just because, you know, I realize how much we don't know. I realize how much, you know, to what you were saying earlier, Andrew, how much our culture and ideas and emotions, all these different things affect how we think, how we perceive, how we interpret. I don't try to use you know, religion as science. I think that anytime religion is trying to do what science is doing or claim what science is claiming, I think it's pseudo religion. I don't think it's religion. Earlier, you know, Ed mentioned like religion as being like a proto science. They're trying to like be scientists. I don't think about it that way. And a lot of like other like researcher or scholars don't think about it that way. And it's mostly due to just thinking about like evolution and cultural evolution and some really interesting philosophy through like Ludwig Wittgenstein. But the idea of like what we believe, how we see things, is all in fact like affected by our culture. And what is culture? Culture is beliefs, actions, practices, routines, rituals. It's technology. It's all a whole host of things. And for me, I believe that all those things presently and also every single second backwards in time have influenced the way that we perceive things today. And so all those things have led up through my personal family branch, through all the histories, all the, you know, cultures have led to my specific family, to who I specifically am. And all that baggage and that direct line have influenced how I think, how I perceive the world, and also what I continue to learn every single day continues to affect how I think, how I perceive the world. And I think that all those things are what philosophers would call a transcendental limit. So, you know, people talk about transcendence and they usually confuse that with transcendental. Transcendental means limit. There's a limit to what we think and say about the world. So Kant is the one that came up with that term. And he used that argument, the transcendental argument, against people who were speculating wildly metaphysically about God. Like, there is a God. I know who he is. He was saying, no, you can't possibly know that because there's limits to what you can know. And God, there is a transcendental limit to you being able to know for sure that there is a God like that. You immediately enter into the realm of science, and as far as science goes, we cannot confirm whether there is a God or not. Okay. So that's a non-starter for me. For me, like I cannot, just from what I know today, after my understanding of science and philosophy and all these different things, is that I cannot meaningfully speak about God in that metaphysically realist way because there's limits.
Yeah,
it's impossible.
I see what you're saying. I would say that probably all three of us are not metaphysical realists. And I see what you're saying, that you're never claiming to like 100% know in all of your beliefs. But I think it's interesting that you mentioned that when people are doing like Christian Science or something, for example, which you and Ed both mentioned, how they're not doing like real Christianity. I think that's interesting because
it's pseudo-religion, which is an idea that I got from Sammy Pielstrom, a philosopher that I had on my podcast.
Right.
He wrote a paper about it.
Right. I listened to that podcast. I think he's really interesting. But what I think is that in the same sense that everyone thinks that they have the true perspective on liberalism, for example, I don't really buy this whole concept of those people who are doing like religious science. They're not practicing real religion. I am practicing real religion. I just kind of find that confusing, to be honest.
Yeah, it can sound arrogant, but it kind of lightens up how you feel about it once you actually start to like break down what that means. And it's still, you know, that Sammy Pielstrom, he came up with that idea and like wrote like a single paper and maybe even mentioned a similar idea in one of his books. But it hasn't been like flushed out completely, but he's basing it off of the work of Ludwig Wittgenstein, which, I mean, he's a complicated guy, but just to give like a general idea, like his whole thing was about language games. So when you hear people talk about language games, it's coming from him. So each kind of like social or cultural practice, like religion, science, come up with anything, sports. Whenever you talk about a specific kind of topic, you are speaking a specific language game. So how you talk about religion is going to be different than how you talk about fixing your car. You're using different words, you're using different definitions, different understandings about things, and it's a language game. And so when people are getting in disagreements about stuff, and like, the whole thing with, when Jordan Peterson was arguing with Sam Harris about the definition of truth, and like Sam Harris kept stopping him, saying like, this is a non-starter. We have to figure this out. They were speaking different language games and weren't able to communicate because they were coming from two different language games. So I can't remember where I was going with that, but my understanding was, is that, what was your original question? I'm sorry. I started going off on a tangent.
No, that's it. That's,
wait, sorry. If you remember what your original question was.
No, me, the more I hear you talk, dude, the more I mean, you're a deist at best at this point. Would you say that's a fair characterization?
No. Just because deism is...
Consider yourself a Christian, right? Rather than a deist?
Yeah, I would definitely call myself a Christian.
Just side note, if you could... Wittgenstein is one of those philosophers that I've heard a lot about before, but I've never gotten into. So if you could send me any book recommendations about him, I would appreciate that.
Yeah, I'll send you some stuff. He's a complicated guy.
Why? If I said you sound like a deist, you said no. I'm curious. What am I getting wrong? So
the deist God is kind of like the classical philosopher image. It's kind of like the philosopher's wet dream, where it is, isn't it? It's a God who created everything perfectly, put it into motion. He's the clockwork, the clock master God, who the intelligent design God. He created everything, put it into motion. God. What's that?
But he's not a person. In other words,
right. So he created the universe and then stepped back and is off doing his own thing. I understand why that.
You agree that that's a more, right? I mean, it's a more plausible. It's more plausible than quote unquote theism or specific belief.
From one perspective, but first of all, that kind of God would only be able to be worshipped if you agreed with the premise that everything is super fine-tuned and perfect and works perfectly together.
No, I don't understand that leap you just made. What do you mean?
Well, why would you
like fine-tuning argument?
Like with isn't an aspect of deism that there is an inherent order and structure in the universe?
Yeah,
and
deism kind of came out of after Newton. Newton was really influential for this intelligent design theory, and that kind of carried Christians for a while, where everything works. Everything has a perfect function and works, and everything has like a type or an essence or a substance.
Oh, yeah, but yes, that's true. I mean, did believe that things were intelligent. A falcon's wing had to be designed because it's so perfectly
right. Yeah. And then Darwin came along.
The smartest people who ever lived could be so wrong, but that's fascinating. But I don't. When I hear deist, I mean, to me, it seems as a non-believer. Again, my non-belief is just because of the absence of evidence. I'm more than what I'm willing to be persuaded. Right. So I'm not atheists who go around saying there is no God is an absurd assertion. It's as absurd as saying there is one to me.
I agree.
So, well,
I'll just
I don't have to make assumptions about the state of the universe. In other words, it seems plausible. It could almost seem plausible to me that there is a being or beings that are so far beyond our intelligence they would be godlike to us based on our capabilities. That
why would those ideas ever come to our head though? Like, why did anybody become a deist in the first place?
They're convenient because they're convenient explanations for the inherent complexity of the universe.
Right. And I would say that people use those kind of arguments to defend even a personal God because it's it worked for them for a while. But then what I was going to say earlier, then Darwin came along and showed just how chaotic nature is and how there isn't perfect continuity in everything, that there is a lot of chaos in the world. So a lot of, there's continuity, but there's also discontinuity. There's mistakes.
You could say that there is some type of agent that sits above everything, that started the Big Bang, and that it's an agent of some sort. It's not pure, the lights weren't totally turned off, right? It wasn't just a natural so-called occurrence. I mean, that to me is, it brings up a lot of, the infinite regress. Where did this come from? And
who created the creator?
Right, exactly. So, it's not a good explanation, but it seems more plausible to me. And I don't understand how you're not.
But I think what Hayden is saying, correct me if I'm wrong, Hayden, is that you don't believe in the deist perspective because you don't believe in this inherent order and structure in the same way that they would claim before Darwin came along and pointed out, no, there's not as much inherent order and structure. Things are more fucking complex than you claim they are.
But they still could have been created by an outside, so-called outside agent.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
The complexity and the disorder arguments hold no weight for me. That has nothing to do with it.
Yeah, but you're an atheist.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter.
You were saying, Ed, how it's plausible to believe something like that. So Hayden, again, correct me if I'm wrong, Hayden, but maybe Hayden partially believes in the Christian God rather than the deist God because he.
All right. So on a scale of 1 to 10, there is a deistic God. Do you believe there's a deistic God? 10 being certainty, 0 being total disbelief.
You use the 1 to 9
0.
scale again.
0.
That's all right. Yeah, 0. Because I can't see.
Hold on. So you're saying, to your lights, it's more probable that there's a personal God in the way that I would colloquially define it. And that's a higher probability of existence than the deistic hands-off agent we simply just don't understand, that doesn't hear our prayers and visit you at church and all the rest of it.
I see your point, Ed.
Yeah.
Yes. I don't. And I'll say what.
Wait.
Why is the personal God more plausible to you than the deistic God, Hayden?
Exactly. That's right.
Because I think there's more evidence for it, and that's automatically broadening the definition of evidence. But let me explain. I can't imagine why anybody would believe in a deist God unless they had a misconception of how the world works. So like earlier when I was saying that, there's the natural design where everything is fine-tuned and works perfectly, I can imagine that person, and there was, tons of Enlightenment guys believed in that kind of God.
Yeah.
But their preconception was wrong about the world. The world is a lot more chaotic. There's mistakes, there's mutations, there's, it's, tooth and claw. There's all these.
Why does an outside agent have to?
Go ahead. Let me just finish. So those guys can believe it and maybe even get inspiration from that belief if they have that misconception. Once you take that misconception away, which actually happened historically, people didn't like that definition anymore because it didn't make sense. Because the only other kind of God that we're speculating at that point is a God who's willing to make the world in an imperfect way. And what kind of God is worth actually believing in that is willing to make things just kind of throwing shit together and leaving? He's kind of just throwing some shit together, some Play-Doh, seeing how it sticks and then leaving, or maybe leaving the project halfway through.
I'm not stipulating.
There are still people who are atheists though, and there are still like Stoics, for example, kind of follow this more deistic perspective. And I'm a big fan of Stoicism, but that's one area where I agree with Epicureans more than Stoics. But I think this brings up another topic that we were going to discuss. We don't have to stop talking about this, by the way, of course, but I was just thinking about how this relates to labels, and you brought up the Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson earlier, and how you brought up Ed, how it seems like Jordan Peterson is an atheist, and that I was surprised that Hayden.
Right, we're going to get there.
So this, to me, I think it's Hayden's own personal definition of God.
But this, I want to go back to that, please. Mm-hmm. So I asked you about your belief, and your certainty scale was higher for the personal God than the deistic God.
Yeah.
Now, putting your personal belief aside, if you can, as best you can, mm-hmm. would you acknowledge? Not would you acknowledge? So that you're saying, and you're saying that scales. That's logical to your mind, that the probability, if we had an envelope with the absolute answer to these questions in that envelope, there's a higher probability of a personal God existing than one that is not involved in human affairs and so on. You believe that?
Interesting. Yeah, and even if you just describe that, I mean, I guess I'm making it even better for myself if you describe that personal God as personal because he's interested in the life or the organisms that he is actually, they actually created.
Well, why are you assuming this is what's interesting about this? Because you said who would be interested in believing that? Who would be interested in worshiping that? Why are you? To me, you're like, and again, I'm using the word smuggling, but only because I can't come up with a better word. You're smuggling in concerns that I wouldn't even think about, or I could just stipulate, and you would probably agree that they don't have to be necessary.
Yeah, they're kind of.
But Ed, guys, I'm coming to the problem.
Concerns, aren't they?
Yes, but listen, I'm coming to the problem as someone that actually wants to decide if I would actually believe these things. You guys aren't.
I understand that.
And maybe you are. I guess I can't say that you never, are actually doing that. But I'm coming from this as I have this understanding, this experience, this,
why couldn't a deistic God create something that isn't, that is flawed? It just would have to be godlike to us.
Yeah. I understand.
I think this is just Hayden, the way that Hayden perceives it.
No, but let me just say that I'm okay. So
because
if there was a deist God who was uninterested in our lives, I don't think that just because a deity does exist automatically deserves our worship and attention.
Oh, of course not. No.
Okay.
That's a separate issue. Here's what I'm getting at. I'm proposing a deistic God as one probability, as a higher probability than a personal God. To me, that seems automatic, and you have a different view. So, and the reason I think that is because a deistic God is a theistic God, is a deistic God with a bunch of other claims and powers and influences and so on that, to me, by definition, makes it less likely, right? Because then we could go from deistic to a broadly theistic God to the Mormon God.
Yeah. Right? Well, I agree. I agree with you.
The more specific you get on the claims, the less probable it is that it's true.
I agree with you that the deistic God seemed more probable than like the personal God, as you're saying, Ed. But that depends on how you define it and how you perceive it too. I mean, it's possible. I mean, like, obviously, being a deist is a way that people have been theistic too. So to me, it just depends on how people look at it. I don't think we're really going to resolve this particular.
No, but we're probing this. That's an interesting observation. I mean, I guess I shouldn't be surprised. Would most believing Christians or Jews or Muslims or Hindus would probably agree with you but as a matter of, I guess, logic, I just laid it out. The probability that one exists over the other, what's more likely, a personal God of some sort or Vishnu? You'd have to say.
But religious people, they don't necessarily
I'm not talking
see it through the lens of logic, because, like, as I was saying, that faith is an emotion, in my opinion. So if you feel that way, then it could be different. But
I appreciate it.
But like Hayden said, he thinks that there's more there. He thinks that it's more probable too. So there's that.
Yeah. To Andrew's point, I don't think that logic translates to every field the way it's used in a given field. But I understand.
That's a dangerous statement, my friend. What is impervious to logic?
But logic was invented by humans in the same way that religion was.
No.
I would say that logic is based off of, because there's logical statements of things that don't actually exist. Yeah, there is.
But logic has a backstory.
I know. I know where it originated.
Pragmatist, you know that.
I know where logic originated from observations, and then we came up with math, and we're able to use those things together.
This is like one thing that you and I were talking about last week, Ed. Like, is it I think one example that I brought up, I might not have used the word logic, but is it logical to want to have sex and eat Cheetos? Because I don't think those are logical things, but
one of them is on a biological level.
Yeah,
you could say that evolutionarily speaking, we are drawn to having sex, but it's not logical to eat Cheetos.
I'll just finish my very, very short point that logic began from observations, and then we created a system for logic and statements and grammar that worked out really well. I'm saying that humans got so good at logic that you can make technically logical statements of things that either don't exist or you have no way of knowing. I'm saying that we're so good at logic that, at a certain point, it doesn't translate.
This reminds me of a podcast I was listening to yesterday, where they were talking about how the smarter you are, the better you get at forming sophisticated rationalizations for your beliefs.
That's very true.
So you could perceive anything as logical if you wanted to.
But it sounds
that doesn't necessarily mean that everything is equally as logical as anything else.
Well, but so Hayden, it sounds to me like you're, and I'm going to use the word conceding. We're not in a debate, but so it sounds to me like you're conceding that it's less logical to believe in a theistic God than a deistic God, if those are the two choices. Would you agree that you're being that you're flying?
Maybe I didn't hear you right.
What's that?
I'm saying it makes more sense from where I'm standing that a personal God exists, that a theistic God exists, than a deist God.
I think the key phrase there is from where you're standing.
From where I'm standing, but also because I have an understanding of the physical world that is very much, I'm going to use a word that you're not going to like, but very much relational, very much interconnected. I do not believe in an all. I don't believe in an absolute. I don't think we're all just little pieces to one thing. I think it's possible. I'm not for certain on that hypothesis, but I think that there are real separate things. I don't believe
No, I got you.
The Buddhists, as far as I understand, the Buddhists think that we are actually all one big thing. Yeah. And so and a lot of Christians believe in that as well. I have been very much influenced. I considered that a lot, and there's a lot of psychological or emotional benefit to believing in that, because you can meditate on that and you get some really nice feelings out of that. But from reading William James specifically and diving into a lot of pluralists and stuff, I think that there are real separate things. I don't think there is just one big all. But at the same time, I think that everything in existence, and I'm saying the universe, whatever there is out there, of course, we haven't seen out there, so unless physics is different out there than it is here, I think that everything somehow, and I'm not a physician or a physicist, But I think that everything that exists no matter how far away apart from each other. I think that just existing itself is a relation between everything that does exist. And I know that was a poor way of putting it, but I'm saying that if there is a God, I'm saying that he is, by his very existence, is in some kind of relation with everything else that exists.
Okay.
I see.
I see what you're saying.
I'm saying, so if there is a deist God, he can't be elsewhere. like he can't be elsewhere than in existence.
Oh, okay. That makes total sense to me.
And so if you can follow that to the next step, where like how I'm thinking about it, and to be honest with you guys, this is the first time I'm actually like articulating my thought on this specific thing. So, but if that God exists and is by nature in relation to other things that exist, as we can attest to as things that exist, we naturally figure out a way to relate to the things in our horizon. So we figure out a way to relate to trees. We walk around them or we climb them. We, figure out how to relate to each other as other subjects, as other things that move around and have thoughts. We have relationships. If that is all that I mean by relational, like I think it still fits with that God. So from deist, I moved to a relational God. So the real question is, do I move from relational God to personal God who actually cares about me individually? I think that's really the real question here.
Yes.
And I would say that at least, as far as evidence for God goes, like we said earlier, I was talking about transcendental limits. We can't like measure things and find out, oh, there's a God, he's right here. So I think there's a limit to us, just like dogs have no idea what a library is and the meaning of a library, we have no idea, we're learning about physics and stuff. That's really cool. But there are limits to what we can possibly know. So with that in mind, because of those limits, you have to think about from that perspective what the evidence for that, deist or even a relational God and like a personal God. What we do have are a bunch of people that have somehow related to something. Now, if it's all one way, but it actually changes the way people live and act and think and believe, then that is at least a partial definition of, a personal relationship with something. Like, can you really have, you know where I'm going?
I see what you're saying, and I actually kind of agree with that relational perspective, just because. Well, I wouldn't say I necessarily call it a belief, but I find it interesting, this kind of like Buddhist perspective of the internet connectedness of all things, and also because I've done psychedelic drugs before, which doesn't mean that I think that this tells me anything about reality at all necessarily. I think it's much more likely that that's just fancy tricks by my brain when I do powerful psychedelics. But I like this idea of the interconnectedness of all things too, and that does a lot to help clarify your perspective, I think. Unless you want to interrogate Ed, interrogate Hayden rather some more, Ed. I think it would be interesting. I think it would be interesting to talk about what I mentioned earlier about labels, specifically in terms of how, like I was saying, you were saying on Twitter that it seems like Jordan Peterson is actually an atheist, and I was actually surprised when Hayden said that he agreed with you, and I kind of was saying that people should just come up with their own definitions, and it's not anyone's right to take away their definitions unless they're saying, like I was kind of alluding to earlier, and like you and I were talking about last week, Ed, unless someone thinks that, like for example, if I suddenly thought that I'm a woman, it wouldn't mean that I literally necessarily cause my dick to disappear and sprout a vagina magically.
Yeah, I would just say, so if we're talking about like labels and stuff, and specifically the Jordan Peterson example.
So it would be.
I think we're losing him.
Go ahead, Hayden. you agreed with me that basically he doesn't believe in a personal God.
Yeah, from you, I would say from your definitions of things, and that goes back to what I was saying earlier about language games. I think that from your definitions of things, which is very, very common, I would say that most people are using similar definitions. I would say that he's probably an atheist. But from my definition of things and how I actually understand language and the world and what I actually think and believe, I think that he is an atheist, because I think that if you live by something, that's definition enough. But I think that he is a materialist, and I think that that's where I would have to like clarify with him personally to like get to the bottom of it. But I think he is a materialist. I don't think
do you mean like a philosophical or metaphysical materialist?
I'm saying so earlier I was talking about metaphysical realism. I think that I don't think that he is a metaphysical realist. I think that he believes in, like very much like I do, like with pragmatist definitions, that the things that operate in our life through our actions are real. Like we can talk about different ideas being real. Is democracy real or not? I mean, at one point it's a social construction, but at another thing it exists. Like we would say, like there are things like evil exists, but what is evil? It's not like a thing in the air. Right. So I would say that he is a materialist, thinking that all there is in existence in reality are material things. I mean, he has shown that and made people very mad, in his evolutionary ideas, showing that he is a materialist. From what I'm gathering, I could be wrong, but I think he is a materialist. And so using that understanding colloquially, I said that, yeah, he's an atheist, supporting or defending, or I said saving Christianity. But, I'm speaking the language that, people are normally using to discuss this.
Interesting. It's
losing you, buddy.
Yeah, we're losing Andrew.
So yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you said. As far as
that's interesting.
You're breaking up, dude. So I agree with everything you said, at least insofar as we can tell what he believes. It seems like what he believes is not very different than my own beliefs as far as these larger questions go.
Yeah, as far as operating in the world and acting in the world, I don't think that you guys are using different functional beliefs other than his motivations.
And that's what we're trying, at least what I'm trying to nail down here, is what do people believe and why do they believe it? And he apparently does not believe in I think he's a lapsed Christian who left probably in the same vein you did, and is pragmatic with all his books about cleaning your room and getting your shit together and all the rest of it, using the tools that he was taught or believed in the past. And his rational mind, for whatever reason, took over and became those flighty ideas with no evidence became less and less attractive to him. But the structure, what's the word I'm looking for? The tools that he uses.
Yeah, I understand.
Are Christian, but again, to me, and that's really not Christian. I mean, that's using a subset of not beliefs, a subset of ways to think about the world and applying it to our world today. But I don't know that we talked about this last time.
He might not even define himself as Christian either. I mean, like to me, he seems like more of a pragmatic Christian, like Hayden. Like it seems like he doesn't really believe in anything supernatural, but he sees the psychological utility of many religions and Christianity in particular.
Yeah, I think that's true. I don't think he believes in supernaturalism. Like I said, he's a materialist. I don't think he believes in a God out there operating in the world, and breaking the laws of physics at all. I think, I think he's very similar to my ideas, if that helps you understand. But I understand where Ed is coming from. I would say it's more likely that he is an actual Christian than he actually believes that there's like a supernatural God. And I know that that's hard to to, you know, reconcile between each other. But that's, you know, that's what I've been doing the last couple of years, is trying to reconcile that, you know.
See, to me, and again, I mean,
that's fair.
It's a far more nuanced conversation, but it's irreconcilable. Religion,
well, clearly it's not irreconcilable though, since there are people like Hayden and Jordan Peterson who think that way.
But again, you'd have to abandon, if your beliefs don't scale with the evidence, right? If your beliefs don't scale with the evidence, you are in the faith camp. And if they, right? So.
Yes, but I would just say that we should expand.
Go ahead.
I would just say we need to expand, and which has been the thing that's been challenging me the past couple of years, is that we need to expand our definition of evidence, because I mean, history, especially like if you study like the history of science, like the history of science has progressed from people considering some things as evidence and not other things, and then being corrected later on. Like we're always not taking in variables and factors and data, and so.
Okay. But those are failures. Those are failures, right? Those are
in one sense. But our failures, many failures, have led to incredible, useful technological advances, or, you know, as Thomas Kuhn calls,
like the invention of penicillin.
Yeah, I mean, tons of errors, lots of errors and lots of misunderstanding about how the world works has led to all sorts of, you know, paradigm shifts in fields. And then like after you start seeing the world differently because you're operating from a new paradigm, you realize, oh, like this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. You know, and you can't see the error until after the paradigm has already shifted. Like,
in fact, one of the Weinstein brothers pointed that out. The one who is the tech guy with the crazy hair.
Eric Weinstein?
They both have crazy hair.
Confused.
Brett Weinstein is the evolution, or Weinstein rather, is the evolutionary biologist. Eric Weinstein is the economist and mathematician.
He made an interesting observation on Sam's podcast that wasn't obvious to me. It was enlightening to me, that, pardon the term, faith heads could be valuable in solving real world problems precisely because of the way that they think and getting those new paradigms. I'm paraphrasing, but
yeah.
And you know, that's just about the best reason I could come up with. If I could snap my fingers and make all this faith stuff go away, it would give me pause. There've been times in my life where I don't really like those questions, but you know, I think the world would be better off without it in a lot of ways, 99 out of 100 ways. But at least that's one way I could come up. I thought to myself, well, that's actually pretty interesting. Someone who is so unconcerned about his belief scaling with evidence might occasionally be right in a way that turns out for us to make breakthroughs in 100 different ways.
Perhaps why you now, Ed, and all three of us are part of the religion of the caliphate and mixed mentalities.
Yeah, it's not a religion, but you know, people use the word religion, God, to fucking mean whatever they care to. It drives me. It drives me crazy, because to me it's smuggling. I don't.
Yeah.
There's no. We have enough words in the English language to describe what we mean. Without, you know.
No, and Ed, I really, really appreciate your annoyance with like what's the word I'm looking for? Like misapplying things, being fuzzy, being unclear. You want to be precise.
Yeah. This is actually something that you two have more in common than me, I think.
Probably. But I appreciate that so much, and I think it is something that people, you know, I want to say people like us, but you know, people who do care about clarity, it's something that they really have to struggle with more than others when paradigms do shift. When we learn something so different and so crazy, or we change our mind in such a way. Did we lose Andrew?
He's
You there?
No, I'm here. I just turned off my
Okay.
camera
Oh,
to see
okay.
if it would make me stop lagging.
You know, when the world around us shifts in our perception like so drastically, and it can be even gradually, we don't even realize it until
Right.
after it's already happened. Like, we are struggling to talk about things in a clear way. And I think that that's something that we have to do. That's why these conversations are really important, because we're not going to be able to talk about the new world tomorrow in a clear way unless we do negotiate these terms and negotiate these things. But like, our definitions for things do change over time because of these paradigm shifts. And it's like, I mean, it's really fascinating on one level, and it's like kind of annoying on another level, like you were just saying. But I think that it's something that people are always having to do. And I think that we, and everyone's always said this about their time, but I do think that we are living in a time where things are changing at such an exponential rate, where we're going to experience paradigm shifts more frequently than people have in the past. And I think that things are going to change on a, maybe every couple of years in certain ways, and we won't know until after it happens. And so we'll be talking about something, and all of a sudden we'll disagree with each other and be like, why do we disagree with each other? And have to work this out. And I think that kind of negotiation over labels and definitions and what we understand when we're talking about these things, I think that has to occur every now and then when those things happen, when the world does change on us. Because the world is always growing and changing, and, sometimes faster than our liking.
Yeah, that's why I think like the internet and podcasts and long form conversations like this, especially between like atheists and Christians like this, are really great and important for how one of the ways that the world has changed in recent years and probably will continue to change.
Yeah. I mean, I really appreciate you guys even being cool enough to talk to, because so many other people wouldn't be able to do this. They just get dogged down and fight and like hate each other. But like, we can kind of fight for fun and argue and stuff and still respect each other. And I mean, like, Andrew, you're a little younger. I think that we understand each other a little bit more. But Ed, like, you are coming from such a different background than I am, and a framework, yet you are still interested in even talking to me. I just find that really, really cool. Thanks.
Yeah. No, well, thank you. I mean, I don't pretend to know her. I mean, this is people have this view that atheists atheists have a spectrum of beliefs, right? The atheism is just weighing in on the probability of an unproven assertion. That's it. Everything else is up for grabs. And I don't have a corner on facts in the universe, and I'm always willing to listen. But I strive to have my beliefs scale with the evidence.
Yeah.
Because what else are you supposed to do?
Well, what you were just saying about atheists, Ed, too, is interesting too, because that I've been defending religion a lot lately, and people like oversimplifying atheism and lumping all. I'm going to turn off my camera here because I'm lagging again. Like lumping all atheists into one category annoys the shit out of me sometimes too. And fundamentalism still annoys me too. So that's why I wrote that blog recently called "Religion is Not Required for Morality," because people, and I know Hayden doesn't believe this for sure, but people still act towards me like fully grown adults. Like, you cannot be a moral person unless you're Christian.
The fact that anybody believes that has not spent any time examining the world around them, because even mice have things that you would call moral. Certainly primates do. Children react to unfair distribution of candy or toys or whatever. I mean, they don't understand what religion is. So, I mean, the fact that anybody makes that assertion is just so absurd. I don't understand how people like that, I don't want to say how they exist. I mean, I just, that is for lack of examination, making a claim like that. I mean, it's just so absurd. It could be dismissed immediately. And you don't need to pull statistics out of your ass about, well, atheists act more moral and this and that. Forget about all of that.
Well, I think that's sort of like fundamentalism in religion comes from people who just don't examine their beliefs at all, in my opinion.
I think that fundamentalism is a natural human tendency, no matter what we're talking about. I think it happens in religion. I think it happens in sports. I think it happens in science. I think it happens. I think it happens everywhere. So I think that when someone has a good idea,
atheism too.
Yeah, and I think that when someone has a good idea or starts something cool, like a video game or a piece of technology or science or whatever it is, and a group forms around it, the original experience, the original function, the original whatever either gets lost or ignored or forgotten. And, we start the trail down to fundamentalism. I think, I mean, you just have to read history to like realize that. And I think that, I think it's always going to happen. So like, I kind of, we can't, or at least I'm not going to say like, I'm not going to yell at people and like try to make them feel stupid, but we can say, look, this is natural. It's okay that you feel this way, but here's what you're missing. Here is what's happening. And I think that that's just how do you say that? A cycle that is always going to happen. I think we're always going to have, people that are seeing things differently have to always educate the people that are certain and fundamentalists. And I think that that's a really important reason why we have to stay open to conversations and open to, being emotionally intelligent. And by that, I mean, being able to actually have a conversation with someone that doesn't, turn into a fight or a fist fight or whatever. We have to stay civil enough to have those open conversations so that we can correct fundamentalists, and then more will come, but we have to always, and we might become them for all we know, and whatever. And we have to be open to someone being like, oh yeah, I am starting to turn really certain about this one thing when I guess I can't,
Yeah, that's why I think it's more important and more interesting to, rather than like you were saying, just try to like fight with people in arguments and try to get them to agree with you, to try to understand why they believe what they do if you disagree with them.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think it's more interesting.
The why is more interesting than the what, usually.
Yeah, and I have to get going pretty soon, but maybe we can have a part 3 at some point and talk about how culture affects, what we think and believe, because, and maybe this will make Ed grin, but I think that all religion is cultural. No matter what I think and believe and think about, a God or a personal God or religion, like I think that all religion, no matter what it is, our beliefs, our actions, I think it's all cultural. I think nothing escapes or is individual or separate or autonomous from cultural evolution.
So
that might be an interesting thing to talk about next time.
Yeah, I agree with that. And we also didn't get to morality, which is one of the topics that I listed, but Ed and I have argued about this at length, and I'm sure we'll get into it. So we can talk about culture for sure next time too, of course. So do you have anything else to add there, Ed, before I just say all the things that I like to say at the end of my videos there, and then you guys can give your plugs?
No, I'm good, man.
All right then. So thanks everyone so much for watching and listening to another episode of the Mindgasms podcast. I really appreciate both of you guys, Ed and Hayden, for coming on here and talking again. It's always fascinating when the three of us get into conversations, and I'm looking forward to the next one. And like I always say at the end of my videos, thank you everyone so much for watching and listening. Like I already just said, thank you everyone so much for subscribing to this channel and for contributing to me on Patreon. And thank you everyone so much for anyone else who subscribes to me on subscribes to my YouTube channel, and for anyone who contributes to me on Patreon. I really fucking appreciate it, and it means a hell of a lot to me. And like I always say, I love you all. Keep being the tiny beam of light that shines through the almost impenetrable darkness in the universe. And most importantly, always remember this: the funk cures all. All right. You guys want to give your plugs there?
Yeah, sure.
I'm Sam's Bulldog. You can find me on Twitter at Edward M. Kennedy 2. That's Sam's Bulldog. And I'm also on YouTube as Sam's Bulldog. You can find me there.
I am Hayden Bruce. You can find me on Twitter at Hayden the Bruce. You can find me at my website, pragmaticchristian.com, or the podcast, Pragmatic Christian Podcast. I'm on the internet regularly, so you can find me all over the place. But yeah, I would just end with, earlier I was saying that I really appreciate the fact that we can have this conversation. I really appreciate it. Before we started having these conversations, the three of us, I was a little worried because we all have like internet personas and it doesn't always reflect on who we all are. And both you guys are really, really cool and, pretty accepting, even if you aren't accepting of my beliefs. And I don't require that. And I think it's cool that we can come from different perspectives and talk about these things, because I think that's where the new ideas come from, is from having two separate perspectives trying to talk about the same thing, and then a new thing comes up. So I think it's really cool that we can continue having these conversations, and I appreciate you guys.
Same here.
Yeah, well said. Thanks a lot, guys. And yeah, looking forward to the next chat. And I added the link for your YouTube channel at your podcast, Hayden, and both of your Twitter pages there to the description for this video. So yeah, looking forward to the next chat. And thanks everyone so much for watching, and adios until next time.
Awesome. Thanks.